Welcome everyone to today's Fox Winter Landscape tutorial. In this piece we will try to capture the quiet, watchful presence of a fox in the snow by blending the warm and cool tones that we create and add contrast and depth with those. All right, well, let's get started. Okay, so as outlined in the Substack post, you can see some tips for creating the fox drawing. Once your fox is drawn on lightly with pencil, you're going to be ready to start painting. So applying a wet on wet technique to the top portion where the sky is in your work, that's our first step. So I'm just liberally applying water here and going across the page with it, carefully following my pencil lines. Yours may look a little different. You may have a larger space of sky, and that's perfectly fine. Again, use your own creative touches here. All right, now for the sky colors, I'm choosing to use a mixture of blues. Whatever blues you have in your palette box is going to be fine. I have ultramarine, cobalt, and then I may also add a little bit of the Payne's gray and neutral tones. And just beginning with some dabbing here. Kind of creates that wintry look to our sky. Gives it a nice base color. And then we'll just continue to dab in, moving paint around, just having fun here and really enjoying this process. Not worrying too much if it looks like trees yet. Spreading it out. Maybe it begins to fade. Just loading up on the color there with those light washes. Maybe mixing in a little blue. Maybe you decided to do a purple sky. So the important thing is that we're layering in those colors. All right, now I'm going in with some of the darker tones now to create those triangular shapes. And again, just kind of dotting this in to give it the illusion of a tree. There's no details here in the background. It is far away, and just dabbing lightly with my brush. Keeping some areas white too, if you'd like to. If you need to stop the video and just to work at your own pace, perfectly fine. Going in now, making a couple more of those defined trees. Now, these will spread. The paper is very wet right now, so anything that we put down on here is going to spread out. And we can always go back in later and redefine things once the paper has had time to dry. Carefully going around the ears of the fox. And just remembering that wherever you put water, the paint will seep if it's close enough. So if there's no water on the ear, there's no worry that any paint will seep in at this point. If accidentally it does go in, there's no worries. We can always clean it up later by adding more color on top. The nature of watercolor is to blend and bleed, and there's not much we can always do to stop it. There's little tricks we can do for sure, but sometimes we have to just embrace its true nature, which is just to flow freely. getting as close around those ears as I can at this point. Adding a little of those dark tones against the tree line there. All right, we're going to start on the fox's body with just some wet water. And if you want to get new water, you can. I'm not. I'm just letting this gray tone sort of be the base. I know that I'm going to be using browns and reds on his fur, and that all this is going to get covered up. So I'm not too worried about the watercolor right now that's going on top. It's not that dark. Okay, so dipping into some burnt sienna, some raw umber, and some red tones are going to give us that nice color for the fox's coat. Now you may want to have a slightly different shade. Maybe you want it to be more golden or have a lot of white area in it, and that's perfectly fine. Again, using your own creativity here. A lot of these are things that I'm saying are just techniques, and you can incorporate them into your own way of doing the painting. Now this is our first wash. Just doing a lot of wet on wet, but also going into some of that wet on dry. So the wet on dry technique is just as it sounds. You're putting a wet brush with wet paint onto dry paper. You won't get as much of that seeping and running that you do with the wet on wet. It's nice to do a combination of the two, and detail work is definitely sometimes more suited to a wet on dry, at least parts of it. Okay, going in here, adding a little bit of those red tones that can be spread out. Still into our, more or less our second layer now with the red. I'm going to be making it darker around, especially the edges of his face. This is going to really bring his face out and his head out, and also create depth and contrast. So we're going to be using those dark colors. Now the feet here with the black or Payne's gray mixture, this is going to really ground the fox, using a dark tone at the bottom. So we want to make sure that he really looks planted here. And since we are using our watercolor paint to make it look that way, we have to use those dark colors. You can just kind of blend that paint up. There's quite a bit of it there on mine, so I'm just using my wet brush and kind of drawing it up. A lot of dabbing, a lot of light touch. And just sweeping that color up to blend it. I am going to be keeping the area under his chin a bit white, so either with the removal of the paint later or just keeping it white now. We can always remove paint with just a wet brush if we need to. Just layering up these tones, getting the color on as much of the body as I'm needing to at this point. Again, stopping the video and working at your own pace. So a lot of those values are created with just extra water and moving existing paint that's already on the paper around. This way we don't overload the paper with too much paint, and we are able to get a large, kind of a lot of values in this sense. I'm just lightly adding some of those tones to the front of his nose. Just more or less giving him some color now. And then continuing to layer in. And this is creating a sense of depth by adding these colors on top of each other. Continuing to use that wet paint to our advantage and spread it and move it around. Need surprisingly little watercolor paint to complete a painting. It also never dries, so it's actually a pretty great hobby as far as cost-wise too. All right, we're just going to extend up into the rest of the body, leaving that tail and tip white. Of course, that's your choice. You don't have to do that. All right. And we're going to get some of those darker tones, the Payne's gray and the black and maybe some umber, to do a little bit around the eye and kind of starting to define the eye out, inside the ears. And remember, if things start to bleed out as they're doing right now into my sky, I really just try to embrace that and go with it. A lot of what happens when we just let go with these watercolors is actually quite astounding and beautiful. So I encourage you to just kind of embrace that flowy quality. And it might surprise you and you end up liking what you thought was a mistake. Okay, I had drawn a rock down here at the bottom, so I'm just going to start filling that in with some of those similar tones. And also the plant, small shrub that's coming out of the snow. If you added a rock or some shrubs in, you can also do that. So starting out with just the wet on dry here, and then starting to layer in just some of that water. I really love this dripping technique where I can just kind of drop those colors right onto that watery line and just see what happens. So blending in some of these siennas and even the ochres and those umbers and dark tones, creating shadows with them, and just letting it really do what it will. So these shadows under the feet of the fox are really going to ground him too. Okay, so you can just kind of move your brush around the page where you feel like you might need to go next. Sometimes one area might seem a little bit too wet. You might need to wait on it. Now, take some of this paint away now from around his eye, because I do want some areas of his face to stay more white. I travel around the page a lot when I paint. I feel it helps me to just kind of not get too caught up in too many details. With watercolor, if I get caught up in the details, the spontaneous sort of way that it unfolds kind of doesn't happen the same. So I do try to move around my page quite a bit. So we can keep kind of going with some of these additional tones and textures to create the fur of his coat or her coat. Again, just using those umbers, raw sienna, even some of the blue tones with the gray or the neutral can make a really rich color. We're going to go around his nose area, making even deeper tones around it, which is going to help with his face popping out. So if you need to get a smaller brush at this point, you can, or something with a good tip to go into some of those smaller areas. And keep wiping away, getting some light areas. And then once it dries completely, you can go back in and add those details. Okay, so here we're going to start kind of spreading out some of that dark color. You can go in for the black or the neutrals just a little bit on your brush and then kind of spread it out and go around the nose. It's going to give it that, not an outline, but similar, and then you're spreading it. And just go slow here and build up the color. Okay, we can add his pupil in there, and if you want any other colors, feel free. I'm just going to stick with the black. Kind of start adding some other tones around the edges of his eye too, if it's dry enough. And that's going to create more depth and realism in his face. Although mine is more illustrative, depending on your style of painting, will kind of either be more illustrative, more realistic. Okay, starting to layer in some of that umber to his fur coat. Maybe add some short marks for texture. You may be using a photo reference as well for this, and that is very helpful. I use a lot of photo reference. We see a lot of foxes around here, so I have a few photos I can use. Okay, laying that texture in. He's definitely sinking in that snow now. Okay, going around the eyes. So after the paint has had a little bit of time to dry and the paper's still wet around the eye, you can blend it out. Just kind of looking around, what do I need to add? What do I need to change? What can I do now while the paper is still wet? What do I need to wait on? So I'm going to get a tiny brush in a little bit to finish off that mouth. Seems dry enough, so I'm going to try it out here. So definitely slow and steady process. Continuing to build those layers around his nose area and even down further on his coat, creating some small lines looking like fur. Okay, and we're also going to want to get some more of those dark tones in the background. So some of those trees that are going to be more in the front, we can layer on top now. And this is also going to help with illuminating the fox and really bringing him out as well. So adding in some more of those dark colors that we originally started with. So now we're having the effect of trees in the front and then trees that are faded in the back, creating more depth. And if you'd like to sprinkle some salt here or add some flecks of white snow with a toothbrush, you certainly could. I'm sure I'll be going back into this fox at least a little bit to finish him off after he's had time to dry. Often look back at my work later and want to add something on. So you'll maybe do the same. Don't forget that if you'd like to share your work in the chat, it is now open for everyone. Thanks so much.